welcome to a special energy transition show here on iPropertyRadio with myself, Carol Tallon. I'm delighted to be joined by my co-host for the day, Dr Shirley Gallagher, CEO of Second Life Battery Services. And we're here today coming to you from the iconic Croke Park at the Business Post Energy Transition Summit 2024, proudly sponsored by KPMG and ESB Networks, where all attention is focused on accelerating the transition to Ireland's net zero emissions future. Shirley, thank you so much for taking the time today and for agreeing to step in and co-host and ultimately host this show. What have you been hearing so far in the day? It's been a really lively one, an interesting one, so many speakers. What has been your impression so far of the day?
So I'm after coming from chairing session 3 on innovation. So there's a couple of speakers that we'll speak with later about that. So I'll leave that to one side.
Perfect.
We opened the show with John Gibbons, who is an eminent climate journalist. He's written many articles on climate change and the need to act. And John always likens the fact that we're on the Titanic and we're burning the furniture to stay afloat. And he used lots of different analogies and kind of gave us a broad picture as to why we are doing this energy transition, why we need to move from carbon, from fossil fuel. And we have targets set by Europe, 55 by 2030, 100% decarbonisation by 2050. And he's showing us images of, intense heat and so on, and floods and so on and so forth. And 90% of climate change impacts is related to water. So water is either too little, droughts, farmers aren't able to grow their crops, or there's too much. So for example, I got flooded during Storm Babette, so I'm really, that whole has impacted me a lot. And then we heard from various different people then as well. So the CRU were there, DEC was there, the Department of Environment and Climate Change and Communications, and also board or Gas Networks Ireland. And we'll be speaking with Padraig later, who's
Brilliant.
Looking at renewable gas in the form of biomethane.
It's such a wide range, and actually that stat that 90% of the impacts around water, that stat blew me away, because I don't think that's something that's well understood. Mm-hmm. And I suppose from our perspective, there's a lot of information to take in, and sometimes it's difficult to understand. So an event like this is a great place to bring very credible, science-based, data-driven approach to looking not just at the impacts, but also maybe some potential solutions. And I know you're going to be exploring those with some of the guests that you have lined up. But before we do that, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you're the CEO of Second Life Battery Services. So what is your contribution to this conversation that's happening not just today in Croke Park, but on a wider scale?
Okay, so I'll have to correct you, Carol, as in I'm COO rather than CEO.
Oh, no problem.
So our CEO is John Byrne. He's the inventor, and he's been working with batteries for the last 20 years. And he cut his teeth, so to speak, with the Transport for London and London Buses and Wright Bus in Northern Ireland, in Ballymena, where they got the contract for London Bus because they could extend the life of the batteries. So what they did at the end of 6 years of running 18 hours a day, the buses, the EV batteries from the buses were taken, and they're helping with grid stabilisation now in Northern Ireland. And John took that, and then he worked with the European Space Agency, and he developed remote controlled anyway, so he worked with controlling batteries remotely. And then he kind of thought, actually, I've worked with big batteries. I can go any kind of battery. So your battery in your laptop, in your power drill, in your EV. And what we've done is we focused on patenting our technology. So we have a patent pending since August. And so what we do is we take waste batteries that, you know, are no longer charging, or for whatever reason they're just not working. We test them. If there's enough juice to go again, we put them into new batteries and we digitally, remotely control these. So we're using long-term storage. We have a customer in Cork who's Cloud Kicks, and we've got our minimum viable product is a 100 kilowatt hour system. So it's kind of server racked and it'll be deployed, but we see that as a modular unit that we'll build on that, and that we'll be able to store green energy, renewable energy, in a green fashion as well.
That is so exciting, but it's also, I appreciate, quite complex for people maybe who are only hearing about it today for the first time. So what we'll make sure to do is actually in the show notes for today, we'll make sure to include a link to your website and to some of the research around that, because it's absolutely fascinating. And again, thank you so much for stepping in to host today. So I'm now going to hand the show over to you and you can introduce your guests.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome, Padraig. You're after been speaking on the second stream this morning. Can you tell us how it went?
I think it went well, Shirley. It's interesting, I suppose, for me coming from the Gas Networks Ireland, and we've very recently, only 2 weeks ago, published a new document called Pathways, which is how we intend to progress to the decarbonisation of the gas network. And I suppose, not to put out too much of a spoiler alert, but if you do look at the Pathways document, it talks about the two sources of decarbonised fuels that we're hoping to use for that is biomethane and hydrogen. Of course, just maybe a moment on hydrogen. I think hydrogen, a lot of people are quite excited about hydrogen in the industry at the moment. But for us, there's an element of going back to the future with that, because we had more than 30% hydrogen in our network over 40 years ago. So it's an interesting development. But for my own part, I'm looking at biomethane, and we see that really as contributing maybe a little bit more initially. Hydrogen will do the heavy lifting in the distant future, but biomethane is the means by which we want to decarbonise quite a portion of our gas in the short term. And of course, biomethane is much more than just about the energy sector, because the source of feedstock for biomethane is predominantly going to come from probably agriculture in Ireland, but also waste food. So I guess for those who are familiar with it, they'll understand this, but if somebody's new to it, biomethane is produced from anaerobic digestion of organic material. And just to put that in simple language, basically things like waste food and slurries, and you can use crops, but there is a sensitivity about using crops in the sense of you don't want to be taking away good farmland for producing crops for energy. That's not the plan here in Ireland, as far as I understand from the policymakers, and that's the direction of travel for biomethane. So Ireland has been identified from a European perspective as one of the best countries in Europe to produce biomethane on a per capita basis. And just maybe to give an example of that, if we compare ourselves to Germany, obviously Germany is about 16 times the size of Ireland in population. But then if you look at the number of cattle, they've only got about 40% more cattle than us. So it's kind of obvious then when you look at the numbers, the data itself supports the idea, well, yeah, this is why biomethane could be a key ingredient here.
And does that mean that the cattle will have to be brought inside then, or?
No, and I think we are looking at various models. Certainly from our perspective, obviously we won't be building biomethane plants ourselves because we're the gas transporter, so from a regulatory point of view we're prohibited from doing that. But obviously we're quite keen to see this develop. But to your question in relation to cattle, we don't see that happening. It could evolve that way over time, but I think Irish cattle are predominantly in summer are outdoors. But having said that, you know, most farms will have tanks where slurry is caught at the moment, and that has methane in it. We're just capturing that. So I think we don't see significant changes to agriculture. I think this will be very helpful to agriculture, particularly the likes of the dairy sector in terms of managing nitrates, but equally then in terms of, say, suckler farming, which is not the most profitable section of farming at the moment and hasn't been for quite some time. Wow. They can diversify into other uses, such as maybe supplying grass and feedstocks to the methane industry.
Well, the milk quota put stop to that. So thank you very much, Padraig, for
thank you for your time.
Talking about biomethane.
Thank you.
From Gas Networks Ireland. Raj, we're after being on stream 3 on innovation. How do you feel it went?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation and the topic. I think it was great to have a mixture of kind of speakers on the stage, where you had the VCs, and then you had my angle coming at it from the entrepreneur, the startup, and our journey and the difficulties and how we get funding and how we look at funding, I suppose. So it was great to have that kind of double-sided view on the session.
And tell us about the business.
Yeah, Affinity EV is the name of the business. We're a tech company based in Ballinasloe in Galway. And what we do is we act as an energy and charging department for automotive brands and their dealerships. So we've some pretty big clients, global clients. We've launched into the US market with a major automotive OEM. We have UK, we're present in UK, and we're about 2 or 3 weeks away from going live in Australia. I think the big thing for us, and why are we here at this summit, being an energy transition summit, is we connect the automotive industry to the energy industry. So what we have to see is a lot of these customers are buying the electric vehicles, but there's a massive energy play that's been missed out on, whereby they need an EV charger. The EV charger is just a gateway product for home electrification. So we're seeing the automotive brands now offering home solar, battery storage, vehicle to grid, vehicle techs. And our technology is the sales enabler to showcase these home electrification products to the automotive customer. So it's a real exciting space we're in.
And what's the website called?
AffinityEV.com.
Okay, right. And where are you going to next?
Yeah, I think our focus at the moment is to scale out into the US. Big opportunity when we look at dealership numbers. Like we have, if we look at a big dealership network, say the Ford network as an example, in Ireland they might have 33 dealers, so our software could in essence go into 33 dealers, where when we look at the North American market, that's 3,000 dealers. So for us, the opportunity is large in the US. The EV adoption rate is slightly slower, but that doesn't matter. It's all about getting into these dealerships and being the first market mover in the space.
And you're signing exclusive deals, I believe?
Absolutely, yeah. So what a good topic that was mentioned was, from a VC's point of view, they look for defensibility or a moat around the technology. With this investment round that we're currently in, we will look at IP. But because we don't have any IP at the moment, what we're doing is we're signing exclusivity contracts on a multi-year contract. So to briefly talk to you about that is, we signed a 3-year exclusivity contract with Qmerit in the US. Qmerit are the largest EV charger installation company in the US, with 90% of the automotive brand partnerships. So that means for us is, we have in essence, if we deliver on what we're saying, we've locked out the competition to 90% of the US market for what we do.
Excellent. Well, I hope it grows well for you.
Yeah, brilliant.
Best
Thanks a
of
lot.
luck.
Delighted to be here.
Take care,
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Teresa, I'd like to welcome you from ESB Networks to Croke Park today. You were speaking earlier in the day. Can you tell us what it was briefly what it was about?
Thanks very much, Shirley. Yes, I was on a panel earlier in the morning, and we were talking about the challenges relative to delivery of infrastructure and in terms of reaching our targets, our carbon in terms of renewables, integration into the network by 2030. And in that panel we had a good discussion, and basically what is really important in terms of a forum like this is to be able to get the views of the different parties, so that we were at a crunch stage in our PR6 price review 6, that we'll be submitting our 5-year plan to the regulator towards the end of this year. And it's really important for us to get the views of the industry, get input in terms of for that plan, and to listen to what's going on and making sure we're hitting the mark relative to delivering for the industry and delivering for our customers in that PR6 plan. In addition to that, my own role is to I'm the Distribution Markets and Systems Operations Design Manager. And what I do is basically we're setting up new flexible services markets, and we're procuring flexible services from the industry to be able to actually use that as an operational tool in the future distribution system operation. So instead of actually building wires, you know what I mean, we can actually get extra capacity onto existing networks.
So can you give us an example, Teresa?
I'll give an example of that in terms of, first of all, say for example, it's at an early stage, but education and awareness. We stood up in 2022 the Beat the Peak programme, and that programme basically is educating customers, and it's at an early stage in the journey, but we've over 21,000 people signed up to that, acting on behalf, you know, to flex their load in response to signals from the distribution operator. In addition to that, we have a Beat the Peak business program, and customers are signing up to that. And basically, we have actually a number of customers, and again, that's to reduce load on the distribution network and reduce the level of constraints. I would say, like, these flexibility markets are early and they're developing. It won't offset the amount of building that has to be done because of the challenge is so big in terms of what has to be delivered, but it will top up that infrastructure build to be able to actually meet more of the demand and more of the renewables integration.
And are you measuring the metrics? Because obviously peak demand, we're at 100% fossil fuel use when we're at peak. Is there a way, are you measuring that?
We are measuring it now. CRU published just recently their smart data access code. At the minute, even though we operate the smart meters, and we rolled out 1.8 million smart meters, and we're collecting great data from them, we can't access them until we can do that under the smart data access code to be able to assess what it means in terms of actually kilowatts, or megawatts. But what we can do is, from the normal rate in terms of customer engagements, it's an honesty issue at the minute, and people, we can see how quickly they open their emails, if they respond, what they respond to surveys, and what they're doing. And we would expect, we would calculate that about, I think, and I'd have to go back to my notes now, but I think about 30% of those customers that have signed up to it actually generally respond to flex events, which is a very good rate relative to that level of, demand response.
Yeah. So I got involved in raising energy awareness around 2020 when there were 6 Amber Alerts in a short space of time, and just kind of how to measure that. Is there a website where people can find out?
There is a website. There's my our ESB portal, my account, if you look into that, and in that what you'll be able to do is go in and see your energy. You'll be able to get your smart meter data no matter what supplier you're with. You'll also be able to go sign up to Beat the Peak Domestic in that, where you can sign up for the program, the signals, the rewards, etc. In parallel to Beat the Peak area, we also have Is It a Good Time, which is kind of a general educational awareness program, and we think this is at an early stage, but if we think, say for example, the CRU have issued published their national demand strategy during the summer, and from that perspective, the NEDs, that's our guiding light now at this stage. But like in that, basically, it's expecting that basically if we reach our cap targets, you'll have almost 1,000 people signed into time of use tariffs. You'll have half of, 850,000 EVs, with a very high percentage of them participating in this demand response. And effectively, we see that there's huge potential there, but we need the education at the start to kind of get people understood. And also, we're working on other things in terms of technical standards, and that came up at our, I think, stream 1 of the meetings earlier on. I think Paddy Flynn mentioned about standards, and we're looking at developing standards for behind the meter technology, so they will be able to co-opt in when the market is right for it. So it all needs to be done in parallel.
Yeah.
And sorry,
that's okay.
One other area, while that's at the mass market level, we're also working at technology level in terms of looking at procuring up to 500 megawatts of flexible demand product. We went out to consultation on that last January. We sent a set of recommendations to the CRU that were accepted during the summer, and we now will be going with the second consultation and a QSQ, hopefully by the end of this year, in terms of actually asking for people to provide that service. And so that's kind of the technology as well as the customer area, and we think it's important to bring all of that, because if we're to reach the level of renewables that we have on the network, we're going to need a huge amount of flexibility, and that flexibility has to come from all areas. And rather than all that money go into building huge grids or building huge big assets, we also need to bring customers along, and communities along with that. And I know Mark McGranahan was talking about that earlier on, and our door is open relative to engaging any sectors effectively that can provide flexibility.
Thanks very much, Teresa.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Tracy, thank you for having the session earlier on innovation, and you're from Vivid Edge. Can you tell us about policies that could help with innovation in energy transition?
Thanks so much, Shirley. Absolutely, and great to be speaking with you today. There are lots of existing sort of policies and grants and supports, but I think sort of at a national level, what's really needed first and foremost is just greater investment in our grid infrastructure, and I think looking strategically, Ireland has a really, really rich natural resource which is called wind. We have the potential to become the new Middle East when it comes to energy, and we could actually have the potential to supply the whole of Europe. And we had some really interesting ideas from Paul earlier on, who's in the hydrogen business. And if we could manage to get the late Eddie O'Connor's idea of supergrid, supernode together, which is really connecting all the infrastructures across Europe, Ireland tapping into wind and eventually hydrogen, could also or could become the biggest energy supplier across Europe, and that's so exciting from in terms of Ireland's economic future and potential. And I think we have to prioritise looking at that strategically and engaging with different countries. One more thing, if I may. Then also, I think just looking at a much more on the ground level. When we're doing projects, so we deliver energy efficiency upgrades for medium and large companies, and a few things kind of stop projects happening. One of the things is when we look at the electrification of heat, you have this challenge, they call it the spark gap, where the price of gas that you're moving from is still a lot cheaper than the price of electricity that you're moving to. So it can make the business case a little bit challenging. And yes, there are some excellent grants from SCAI, maybe potentially up to 40% of the heat pump, but it may not be enough to make the business case work. And what we find looking at heat pumps and also looking at solar, the long-term business case is so compelling. In other words, the cost of your energy over 30 years can be, below 10 cents potentially. However, the near-term economics may not be that great, and business leaders are much more influenced and measured by the next 3 years rather than the 30 years. So the grants and supports really need to maybe look closer at the real economics and make sure that they're incentivizing businesses to do something now that is absolutely right in the long term for their businesses, and for their and for the economy as a whole.
Okay, and just going back to your use of our wind and developing the whole commercial offshore wind in Ireland, and are you thinking that we send it out as is, or we convert? Where would you build the hydrogen?
I am not a hydrogen expert, so I'm not even going to try and answer that question. Okay. But I just know, hydrogen is emerging, and other people will understand better. I understand from the speaker today. I mean, hydrogen is already in the system, but to deliver it at scale, I understand there are some further challenges to be addressed. But it's just more the idea of connecting the grids across Europe so that they are positioned to receive have the channels are set up to receive the energy that could be produced off the coast of Ireland. So it's really, really that concept. But I'm excited by it strategically, not my area of expertise, but if I was choosing areas that I think Ireland, kind of the Irish government should be examining to firmly place Ireland's role as a critical player in the economy within Europe in future, it has to be a priority.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you so much for talking to me today, Shirley.
You're welcome.
And that's all we've time for here today at the Energy Transition Summit. From Croke Park, huge thanks to the Business Post team, to KPMG and ESB Networks, and thanks to all of our expert contributors today. Especially thanks to Shirley for being a superb quickfire host with your Q&A for so many of the experts here today, and really try unlock so much of the knowledge and insights from the day. Finally, my thanks to producers Katie Tallon and Taquiva Scully, and thank you indeed for listening in. We'll catch you on the next episode here on iProperty Radio.